Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from. So feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us. Back in 2008, when I was still very young, my brother, my mom, and I went on a trip to visit my grandparents. It was supposed to be a simple, happy family visit. Nothing unusual stood out at first. We arrived, spent time together, laughed, ate well, and enjoyed being away from home for a bit. I remember feeling calm and safe there. My grandparents' house always had that feeling for me, like nothing bad could ever happen inside those walls. It was familiar, warm, and full of memories. The next day, we were supposed to take a train back home, so everyone decided to sleep early. It was a normal night, quiet and uneventful. I went to bed beside my mom, feeling tired from the trip. I remember closing my eyes, thinking about how early we would need to wake up. At that moment, nothing felt strange, nothing felt wrong. If someone had told me that night would change the way I see reality forever, I would not have believed them. At exactly 11:34 at night, I suddenly woke up. What woke me was the sound of a crow, not outside, but inside the house. I heard its voice clearly, loud and sharp. And when I opened my eyes, I saw a crow flying inside the kitchen. It startled me badly. My first thought was very logical. I assumed a window must have been left open and the bird somehow flew inside by mistake. Even though it was late and strange, I tried to stay calm. I got out of bed and walked toward the kitchen. The house was quiet and everyone else was asleep. When I reached the kitchen, there was nothing there. No crow, no sound, no open window. Everything was exactly as it should have been. That confused me, but I convinced myself that maybe I imagined it. Or maybe the crow flew out quickly without me noticing. I went back to bed and lay down beside my mom. She was sleeping peacefully. Her presence made me feel safe again, and slowly I drifted back to sleep. That is when everything truly began. I don't know how to explain what happened next in a way that sounds normal, because it wasn't. I suddenly felt like I was no longer in my body. It wasn't like dreaming. It felt real in a way dreams usually don't. I felt aware, conscious, like I was awake, but somewhere else. I found myself standing on a street outside the house. The night air felt heavy. Everything looked darker than normal, like the world had lost some of its color. Then I saw it. A figure. It was tall, extremely tall, and very lean. It wore a black hood that covered its face completely. I couldn't see any features, and just darkness where a face should have been. The figure moved slowly but confidently, like it knew exactly where it was going. I watched as it walked toward my grandparents' house. I felt panic rising inside me. I knew somehow that this thing was dangerous. I tried to move, tried to scream, but it was like I was stuck, forced to watch. The figure entered the house and began climbing the stairs. I knew where it was going. It was coming to the room where I was sleeping. My fear became overwhelming. Then suddenly I snapped awake. I was back in bed. The room was dark. My mom was still beside me. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. I told myself it was just a nightmare. A vivid one, but still just a dream. My heart was racing, but I tried to calm down. That relief didn't last long. Almost immediately, I felt something else. a feeling I had never experienced before and never want to experience again. It was a deep, heavy sense of dread. Not fear like being scared of the dark, but a powerful feeling that something was wrong. Something was watching me. I felt it standing near the doorway. I didn't want to look. Every part of me was screaming not to turn my head, not to confirm what I already felt. But somehow I forced myself to gather all the courage I had and slowly looked toward the door. It was there. The same tall, lean figure I had seen moments earlier. The black hood covered its face, but I could see its eyes. They weren't glowing, they weren't bright. They were dark, hollow, empty, like deep holes with nothing inside them. It stood there silently. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body felt frozen. Then, without warning, the figure began to change. It didn't walk away. It didn't fade. It turned into dust, dark and thick, and that dust moved toward me. It entered me. The moment it did, I started choking. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and I began wheezing loudly. It felt like something was crushing me from the inside. I tried to scream, but only broken sounds came out. Then suddenly, every light in the house turned on. To this day, I have no idea how that happened. No one flipped a switch. It was like the entire house was flooded with light all at once. My grandfather rushed into the room, clearly alarmed. He gave me some medicine, trying to calm me down and help me breathe. After that, I fell asleep again. The next morning, I was taken to a doctor. I explained what I could, though I didn't tell everything. The doctor dismissed it, saying it was just an allergic reaction. That explanation didn't sit right with me, but I was too young to argue. As we were leaving the doctor's office, something else happened. I noticed my body breaking out in hives. Large, itchy boils appeared all over my skin. They stayed there for a full week before finally disappearing on their own. That incident changed me, not just emotionally, but in ways I can't fully explain. After that night, many things in my life shifted. Strangely, most of those changes were good. I became more aware, more focused, more driven. It felt like something had unlocked inside me. At the same time, I was never the same again. Even now, years later, I still see that figure sometimes. Not up close. It doesn't approach me anymore, but I catch glimpses of it, watching from a distance, always observing. Never speaking. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was something supernatural, something psychological, or something else entirely. All I know is that it felt real, more real than any dream I have ever had. Doctors gave me simple explanations, but deep down, I don't believe them. Something happened to me that night. Something entered my life, changed me, and then stepped back into the shadows. And even today, I still don't fully understand what it was or why it chose me. I was 15 years old when it started, and at first I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. It began quietly, in a way that didn't feel dramatic or dangerous, just small moments that felt slightly off. I would leave my house and notice a gold Dodge Intrepid driving slowly nearby. Sometimes it would pass me once, sometimes twice. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a common car. Gold wasn't exactly a rare color. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just a teenager with an overactive imagination. But then it kept happening. Every time I left my house, one of those cars would appear. Sometimes it was one gold Dodge Intrepid. Sometimes it was another. At first I thought it was the same car, but over time I realized there were two. Two different gold Dodge Intrepids. Different model years, different drivers. One of the men looked to be in his early 30s. He had dark hair and a mustache. The other man was much older, probably in his 60s, with white hair. I never saw them standing, only sitting in their cars. So I have no idea how tall or heavy they were. All I ever saw were their faces behind the wheel. For about the first month, I didn't tell anyone. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. No one else mentioned seeing them, and I didn't want to sound crazy. I would think, there's no way two grown men are following a 15-year-old girl everywhere she goes. That kind of thing doesn't just happen, right? Except it did. I couldn't leave my house without one of them appearing. Walking to the store, going to a friend's house, heading to school. There they were. Always close enough for me to notice, but never doing anything obvious enough that I could easily explain it. They didn't come to my house directly. They didn't knock on the door. They didn't speak to me. They didn't try to grab me or pull me into a car. At that point, it was creepy, but not outright terrifying. It felt like being watched, not hunted. Still, that feeling alone was enough to slowly eat away at me. Then one day, someone else saw it. I was walking with my boyfriend, and that day, the older man was the one following me. He kept driving past us, turning around and driving past again, over and over. I finally pointed him out to my boyfriend and told him to watch. We started counting, once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. By the time the same car with the same driver had passed us 15 times in a 6-block area, my boyfriend stopped laughing. He stopped shrugging it off. He believed me. That was the first time I felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that I wasn't crazy. Fear because now I knew it was real. After that, more people noticed. My mom saw them. My adopted mom saw them. My brother saw them. Friends saw them. Even the police saw them. They were real. 2 men, 2 gold Dodge Intrepids, always nearby. And still, nothing was done. The police didn't have much to go on. The men weren't threatening me directly. They weren't breaking any clear laws. They were just there, watching, following, circling. That went on for almost a year. 15 months of never being alone. 15 months of knowing that every time I stepped outside, one of them would be there. Sometimes both. Every move I made felt observed. Every errand, every walk, every normal teenage moment felt contaminated by that awareness. I stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like an object. Then came the night that changed everything. It was winter, cold, dark. I had a fight with my mom, the kind of emotional, explosive fight that feels unbearable when you're a teenager. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and stormed out of the house at 1 a.m. to clear my head. That was my mistake. I made it about 3 blocks before I saw him. The younger man, dark hair and mustache, sitting in his gold Dodge Intrepid. The street was empty. No other cars, no people, no open stores, no cell phone in my pocket, no weapon, just me and him. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not the slow, creeping unease I had lived with for months, but a sharp, animal panic. I knew the area well, so I turned and ran. I cut through yards, ducked between houses, slipped into back alleys. I ran as fast as I could. Every time I came back out into the open, he was there. He kept getting ahead of me. No matter how I changed direction, no matter how I tried to disappear, he was always waiting, calm, patient, like he knew exactly where I would come out next. I made it home somehow. I don't even remember unlocking the door. I just remember slamming it behind me and collapsing inside, shaking. Something broke in me that night. For almost a year, I had lived under this quiet pressure. Always watched, always followed, never touched, never spoken to. That night made it clear how powerless I really was. I realized something terrible in that moment. If they wanted to kill me, they could. If they wanted to rape me, they could. And no one would be able to stop it. That thought snapped something inside me. The next day, the older man followed me again. Same gold Dodge Intrepid, same slow circling, same quiet presence. Then he did something different. He pulled up directly in front of me at an intersection and stopped. He didn't get out. He didn't say anything. He just sat there and smiled at me through the window. I lost control. All the fear, anger, exhaustion, and helplessness exploded at once. I ran at the car and threw myself against it, trying to smash the driver's side window with my elbow. I didn't care if I got hurt. I didn't care if I died. I just couldn't live like that anymore. He laughed. He waved at me. Then he drove away, leaving me standing in the middle of the street, screaming after him. I screamed everything I had been holding inside for months. "So if you want me, motherfucker, I'm right here. Come and get me." I don't know how long I stood there crying and shaking, but after that, something changed. They didn't disappear completely, but they backed off. They still followed me, but from farther away. They gave me space, like they had tested something and gotten what they wanted. The following spring, the older man approached me one last time. He asked if I wanted a ride. I said no. After that, they slowly faded out of my life. No explanation, no answers, no closure. To this day, I remember every detail. The cars, the faces, the way they moved, the way they smiled. The younger man drove a 1999 gold Dodge Intrepid. The older man drove a 2000 gold Dodge Intrepid. I even remember his license plate, MI tag of NJA328. They followed me for 15 months. They made direct contact once. And 12 years later, I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. Sometimes I wonder if they were testing boundaries. Sometimes I wonder if I was being prepared for something worse. Sometimes I wonder if the only reason I'm alive is because I stopped acting afraid. And sometimes late at night, I still worry they'll come back. Not because I think it's likely, but because once you've lived with that kind of fear, it never fully leaves you. It settles deep inside, changing the way you see the world, the way you trust, the way you move through life. I was 15 years old when it happened, and even now, years later, part of me is still that girl, watching a gold Dodge Intrepid circle the block, waiting for something I never understood. This story almost feels like it doesn't belong to me, because I was too young to remember any of it myself. But even though I don't have a single memory of it happening, it has stayed with me in a way that feels just as heavy as the things I actually experienced. It's one of those moments that only becomes terrifying years later, when you finally understand what was really going on around you. When this happened, I was about 18 months old. At that time, my family was living in a quiet neighborhood. From the outside, it seemed like a normal place to raise a family. Houses close together, neighbors who recognized each other, streets where kids played and parents felt mostly safe. Nothing about it looked dangerous. Then girls started going missing. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just one disappearance. Easy for people to dismiss as a runaway or a misunderstanding. But then another girl went missing, and then another. The fear started to spread quietly, the way it always does in places that aren't used to it. Parents talked to each other in low voices. People started paying more attention to who was walking down the street. I was too young to notice any of that. To me, life was just life. I slept in my bed. I played. I cried. I laughed. I had no idea that something terrible was happening around us. One night, the phone rang in our house. My dad answered it. On the other end of the line was a man my dad didn't recognize. His voice wasn't panicked or rushed. According to my dad, it was calm, controlled. The man told him that he knew where his daughter was. He said she was dead, but that he knew where she was. My dad didn't panic. He assumed it was a prank call. At that point, prank calls weren't unusual, and there was nothing about the call that immediately convinced him it was real. He told the man that his daughter was in bed, safe, and that he shouldn't call again. Then he hung up. At the time, that felt like the end of it. Life went on. Days passed. The phone call became just another strange moment. easy to forget in the routine of family life. My dad didn't dwell on it because there didn't seem to be any reason to. Then later, a body was found. It was the body of a young girl. When my dad read about it in the newspaper, something caught his attention immediately. The girl's name was printed there, and it was the same surname as ours. Even more disturbing, she had lived on the same street we did. That was the moment everything clicked. Suddenly, but the phone call wasn't a prank anymore. Suddenly, it was something much darker. My dad realized that whoever had called him hadn't just been guessing. They hadn't picked a random number. They had known details. They had known enough to make the call feel personal. He reported the phone call to the police, but by then, it was already too late. The people responsible didn't stop. They went on to rape, torture, and kill 3 more girls. Each time, the fear in the neighborhood grew stronger. People locked their doors earlier. Parents kept their children closer. Trust in the safety of the area disappeared completely. It only ended when their final intended victim managed to escape. She survived. And because she survived, the perpetrators were finally caught and arrested. By then, the damage was already done. The killers became notorious in the suburb where I grew up. Their names were spoken in warning, half joking but not really. Adults would say things like, "Don't stay out too late," or "The Bernies will get you." It was the kind of phrase that kids overhear and don't fully understand at first, but still feel the weight of. I knew exactly who people were talking about. I was told about all of this when I was around 12 years old. At that time, we were still living in the same house. Hearing the story at that age scared the absolute hell out of me. Suddenly, everything felt different. The walls of the house didn't feel as solid anymore. The street outside didn't feel familiar. Every corner felt like it held a memory I couldn't see. The idea that someone had called our house, had spoken to my dad, and had claimed to know where I was, even though I was safe in my bed, was terrifying. The idea that if things had gone just slightly differently, that phone call might not have been a lie was even worse. What scared me most was how close it all was. Same surname, same street, same neighborhood, same time. It didn't feel like something that happened out there to someone else. It felt like something that brushed right up against my life without touching it, like a shadow passing just inches away. I started thinking about that phone call a lot after I learned about it. I imagined my dad standing there with the phone in his hand, brushing it off, not knowing how serious it really was. I imagined the person on the other end of the line, knowing exactly what they were doing, knowing they were causing fear, knowing they were speaking to a father. I thought about how unaware I had been, sleeping peacefully in my bed while something so dark existed just beyond the walls of our home. It changed the way I thought about safety. Before that, danger felt abstract. Something you hear about on the news, something that happens to other people in other places. After that, it felt real. It felt close. It felt like something that could reach into your life without warning. Even though I didn't remember the events themselves, knowing they happened shaped the way I saw the world. It made me realize how thin the line is between normal life and absolute horror, how easily things can go wrong, how quickly safety can disappear. What's strange is that this story doesn't involve anything supernatural. No ghosts, no strange voices, no unexplained figures, and yet, it might be one of the scariest stories of all, because it's real, because it happened, because it could have ended very differently. The idea that my life intersected, even briefly, with something so violent and cruel still makes my stomach turn. Not because I think those people were somehow watching me specifically, but because of how random it all was, how close, how easily I could have been just another name in a newspaper. Sometimes, when I think about everything else that's happened in my life, all the strange moments and unsettling experiences, this one stands out in a different way. It doesn't feel mysterious. It doesn't feel symbolic. It feels like a reminder. A reminder that fear doesn't always come from shadows or abandoned houses or unexplained voices. Sometimes it comes from real people making real choices, leaving damage that ripples outward and touches lives in ways that aren't always obvious at first. Even now, years later, when I think about that phone call, I feel a chill. Not because I believe something supernatural was involved, but because I know how close we were to something truly horrific, and knowing that is enough to haunt me. I was around 14 when this happened, old enough to feel independent but still young enough to completely underestimate how close danger can be. At that age, you assume bad things happen somewhere else, to other people, in places you don't know. Home feels safe by default. It feels like a shield. I learned that night how thin that feeling of safety really is. The house I grew up in had a small garden at the back. Nothing fancy, just a patch of grass and a few plants my mom tried to keep alive. Along the edge of the garden was a wire mesh fence, the kind you can see straight through. On the other side lived our neighbors, and they had a dog named Priscilla. She was a shaggy, lovable thing, not very bright, but very enthusiastic about barking, especially at night. Priscilla had a habit of barking at absolutely nothing, or at least nothing we could see. Cats passing through the yard, leaves blowing the wrong way, shadows moving across the fence. It was normal for her to start barking in the middle of the night, loud and persistent, like she was warning the world about some terrible threat that only she could sense. Because of that, we had all gotten used to it. Her barking had become background noise, something you roll your eyes at rather than investigate. That night, it was around midnight when she started up again. I remember it clearly because the house was already quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens late at night. The TV was off, dishes were done, and the only sound inside was the faint hum of electricity and the occasional creak of the house settling. All the curtains and blinds were drawn, every window covered. We were sitting downstairs, while my mum and I winding down before heading to bed. Priscilla's barking cut through the silence, sharp and sudden. It echoed through the yard and bounced off the fence. She sounded more frantic than usual, barking in quick bursts instead of her normal, steady rhythm. My mum looked at me and asked if we should check outside just to be sure everything was okay. I barely thought about it. I shrugged and said something like, "Nah, Priscilla's probably just barking at a cat." I sounded confident, dismissive even. I had heard that barking so many times before that it didn't register as anything unusual. In my head, it was routine, a dumb dog doing dumb dog things. After that, we turned off the light in the room. The sudden darkness felt normal, familiar. We walked upstairs, said goodnight, and went to bed like any other night. I didn't look out the window. I didn't peek through the curtains. I didn't hesitate. At the time, I thought nothing of it. The next day changed that completely. It was daytime, bright and ordinary, the kind of day that feels completely disconnected from anything frightening. The sun was out, birds were making noise, and the house felt warm and normal again. That's when the neighbor's housekeeper came over to talk to my mum. She was a woman who worked there regularly, and my mum chatted with her casually whenever they crossed paths. I wasn't in the room at first, but I remember hearing the shift in my mum's voice, the way it went quiet, serious, almost tight. When I came closer, I could tell something was wrong just by the look on her face. The housekeeper started explaining what had happened the night before. She said that when Priscilla started barking around midnight, she had looked outside to see what was going on. From her side of the fence, she had a clear view of our garden and the side of our house. She told my mum that she saw a man standing outside, not just anywhere outside. He was standing right by the window, the exact window I had been standing in front of just moments before. talking to my mum and brushing off the barking as nothing. She said that when she looked out and made eye contact with him, he noticed her immediately. He didn't run. He didn't hide. Instead, he made a slow, deliberate gesture toward her, a motion that needed no words, a motion that clearly meant, "If you scream, I will kill you." My stomach dropped when I heard that part. The housekeeper said she froze. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just watched as the man stood there for a moment longer, then eventually disappeared into the darkness. She didn't call out. She didn't come over to warn us. She was too scared. She stayed inside and locked her doors, hoping he wouldn't come back. By the time my mum heard this story, it was already the next day. I remember the way the room felt when it all sank in. The air felt heavier, like it had thickened. My mind immediately went back to the night before, to the moment I had stood right in front of that window, to the sound of Priscilla barking, to my casual dismissal, to how close I had been to the glass, completely unaware that someone was on the other side watching us, watching me. The realization hit in waves, first fear, then disbelief, then a deep, unsettling sense of vulnerability. I kept replaying the moment in my head, imagining how easily things could have gone differently. What if I had opened the curtain? What if I had leaned closer to the window? What if I had gone outside to check? I thought about how confident I had sounded when I told my mum it was probably just a cat. How sure I was that there was nothing to worry about. That confidence felt embarrassing in hindsight, but more than that, it felt terrifying. We never saw the man again. There were no further incidents, no break-ins, no reports from neighbors. He appeared once, silently, and then vanished from our lives as suddenly as he had entered them. That almost made it worse. There was no explanation, no closure, no reassurance that he had been caught or scared off or moved on. Just the knowledge that at some point, in the middle of the night, a stranger had been standing outside our house, close enough to see inside, close enough to threaten someone who noticed him, and close enough that we could have crossed paths without even realizing it. After that, things changed for me. I stopped trusting nighttime sounds. Every noise felt suspicious. A creak in the house made my heart race. Barking dogs no longer sounded annoying or pointless. They sounded like warnings. I started double-checking locks before bed, even if I had already checked them once, sometimes twice. And the curtains. I check behind them constantly now. Every time I hear something outside at night, I pull the curtain back just enough to look into the yard. I scan the shadows, the fence, the corners where someone could stand unnoticed. I know it probably looks paranoid from the outside, like I'm some kind of nervous hermit peeking into the dark. But I can't help it. That one night rewired something in my brain. It taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it hides behind normal sounds you've learned to ignore. Sometimes it's standing inches away while you feel perfectly safe, convinced that nothing is wrong. The scariest part isn't that there was a man outside our window. The scariest part is how close I was to seeing him, how close I was to acknowledging his presence without understanding what that might have meant, how easily curiosity or caution could have put me directly in his line of sight, how easily my assumption that everything was fine could have turned into something irreversible. I think about Priscilla differently now too. That not-so-smart dog might have been the only reason the housekeeper noticed him at all. Without the barking, he could have stood there longer. He could have moved closer. He could have waited. I don't know what his intentions were. I don't know if he was casing houses, watching people, or looking for an opportunity. Not knowing is what makes it stick with me. The unanswered questions, the open-ended fear. Years later, the memory still crawls up my spine when I think about it. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, but in a quiet, realistic way. The kind that makes you realize how fragile normal life really is. How easily something terrifying can slip into the background of an ordinary night and almost go unnoticed. I don't brush things off anymore. If a dog barks in the middle of the night, I pay attention. If something feels off, I trust that feeling. I would rather be cautious than dismissive. I would rather look foolish than be unaware. Because once you realize how close you were to danger without knowing it, you never quite feel the same again. I was a freshman in college when this happened, and even now, years later, I can still feel the fear in my chest when I think about it. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal to me that I walked home alone at night. My job was close to the dorms, maybe half a mile away, and I had walked that route so many times that it felt routine, familiar, safe even. That false sense of safety is what still bothers me the most when I look back. I worked evening shifts, and most nights I would get off late. It was a college town, so late nights were normal. People were always out, especially on weekends. The streets felt alive even after midnight. I convinced myself that because there were bars, students, and traffic, nothing bad could really happen. I was young, stubborn, and overly confident in my ability to take care of myself. This particular night was a Friday. I remember that clearly. It was after 1 a.m, which meant the bars had just closed. That detail matters because the energy in the area changed fast. 1 minute the streets were loud and crowded, and the next they felt oddly empty, like someone had flipped a switch. Drunk people were stumbling toward cars or apartments. Police lights flashed in the distance, and then, suddenly, there were long, quiet stretches with almost no one around. I left work and started my usual walk back to the dorm. The air was warm, the kind of night where everything feels still and heavy. University Drive was the main road I had to walk down. It was wide, with palm trees planted in a median down the middle, separating the lanes going east and west. I walked on the sidewalk, heading east toward campus, and my mind mostly focused on getting home, maybe grabbing a snack and going to sleep. That's when I heard yelling. At first, I didn't even look. A car passed by going west, and a group of guys leaned out of the windows shouting things at me, catcalling, laughing. The kind of behavior you learn to ignore as a woman, especially in college. I kept my head forward and didn't react. I told myself it was nothing, that engaging would only make it worse. But then I noticed the sound of the car change. The engine slowed and something in my gut twisted. I glanced over my shoulder and my stomach dropped. The car had turned around in the median. It was now coming back in my direction. Before I could fully process what was happening, the car stopped and I saw doors open. 2 of the guys got out. That was the moment fear truly hit me. It wasn't the slow unease you feel when something is off. It was sharp and immediate. My heart started pounding so hard, it felt like it was in my throat. Every instinct in my body screamed that I was in danger. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just ran. I took off down the sidewalk as fast as I could, adrenaline flooding my body. I wasn't a runner. I never had been. But fear does strange things. My legs moved before my brain could catch up. I could hear my breathing loud and uneven, and the sound of my footsteps hitting the concrete felt unreal, like I was watching myself from the outside. I knew the area well enough to make a split-second decision. I couldn't stay on the main road. There was too much open space, nowhere to hide. I veered off onto a side street that led onto campus. I knew this street was a dead end for cars, blocked by barriers, but there were paths and walkways for pedestrians. Behind me, I heard the car roar back to life. They jumped back inside and came after me. The sound of tires and an engine accelerating behind you when you are running for your life is something I will never forget. It felt like time slowed down. Every second stretched. Every movement felt heavy. I sprinted down the side street and cut hard toward campus. darting off the paved path and into a darker area near some bushes. I dropped down and hid. I crouched low, pulling myself as deep into the bushes as I could, trying to make myself small. Branches scratched at my arms and legs, but I didn't care. I was shaking so badly I was terrified they would hear me. I forced myself to breathe slowly, clamping a hand over my mouth to keep myself quiet. The car pulled into the dead-end street. I could hear doors opening again, footsteps on pavement, voices. They were close, too close. I peeked through the leaves just enough to see shapes moving under the streetlights. 3 of them were out of the car now. They were looking around, scanning the paths and sidewalks, trying to figure out where I had gone. I stayed frozen, barely daring to blink. Then I heard one of them laugh. "Damn," one of the guys said, sounding almost impressed. She was fast. They stood there for a moment longer, talking among themselves, checking a couple of directions. Every second felt like an hour. I was certain that if they took one more step in the wrong direction, they would see me. If they had, there would have been nothing I could do. I knew that. I wasn't strong. I wasn't fast enough to outrun them on foot if they spotted me. Finally, they gave up. I heard them get back into the car. The doors slammed shut, the engine started, and the headlights swept across the area as they turned around and drove away. I didn't move. I stayed in those bushes for at least 20 minutes. I didn't check the time. I didn't check my phone. I just listened. Every sound made me flinch. A passing car, footsteps far away, even the wind moving the leaves. I waited until my body stopped shaking, until my breathing slowed, until I was absolutely sure they were gone. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak. I brushed leaves and dirt off my clothes and looked around, half expecting to see them again. The campus was quiet, peaceful, almost eerily so, like nothing bad had just happened. I walked the rest of the way back to my dorm as quickly as I could without running, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got inside and locked the door behind me, I broke down. I sat on my bed and cried, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. That night changed me. Before that, I believed that as long as I was smart and aware, I would be fine. I believed bad things happened to other people, in other places, under worse circumstances. I learned very abruptly how wrong that belief was. After that night, I never walked home alone after work again. If I worked late, one of the guys from my floor walked me back, every single time. I didn't care if it was inconvenient or awkward. I didn't care if I felt embarrassed asking. My safety mattered more. Even now, when I walk alone at night, my senses go on high alert. I listen to every car. I watch every shadow. I plan escape routes without even thinking about it. That night taught me how quickly a normal situation can turn dangerous, how fast control can be taken away. I don't know what those guys intended to do if they had caught me. I try not to think about it too much, but the fact that they turned around, got out of the car, and chased me tells me enough. It tells me that ignoring them wasn't enough, that being on a familiar road wasn't protection. That being close to home didn't mean I was safe. I was lucky. That's the part that stays with me the most. I was lucky that I knew the area, lucky that there was a place to hide, lucky that they gave up, lucky that fear gave me speed I didn't normally have. And I think about how easily that luck could have run out. I want to start by saying that compared to some of the stories people tell, this one might sound small or even a little silly on the surface. Nothing dramatic happened. No one got hurt. There were no police, no break-ins, no clear answers. But that's exactly why it stayed with me. It was simple, quiet, and deeply unsettling in a way that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. This happened when I was still in school. I was an only child, and both of my parents worked long hours. Most days I came home from school to an empty house. That was normal for me. I was used to the quiet, used to letting myself in, dropping my bag, grabbing a snack, and killing time until my parents got home around 6 in the evening. Being alone didn't scare me, it felt routine. That day was no different at first. I walked home after school and got there earlier than usual, around 2 in the afternoon. The house was exactly how I expected it to be. Quiet, still, no cars in the driveway, no TV noise, no voices. I unlocked the door, went inside, locked it behind me out of habit, and set my stuff down. Everything felt normal. Almost immediately, I had to use the bathroom. Nothing unusual about that either. I went down the hall, closed the bathroom door, and sat down. The house was silent. No music, no TV, no phone notifications. Just that heavy, empty house quiet where you can hear the hum of electricity and the faint sounds of the building settling. I remember thinking about random school stuff, completely relaxed, not paying attention to anything around me. Then it happened. There was a loud knock on the bathroom door. Not a light tap. Not a polite knock. It was hard and sudden, like someone had knocked with purpose. It made me jump on the toilet. My first instinct was that one of my parents had come home early. That was the only explanation my brain would accept in that moment. Without even thinking, I called out, "Mom? Dad?" No response. I waited a second, thinking maybe they didn't hear me through the door. Maybe they knocked and walked away. That seemed reasonable. Parents do that. I shrugged it off, finished up, cleaned myself up, and opened the bathroom door. The hallway was empty. That's when the first crack of unease appeared. It wasn't panic yet, just confusion. I walked down the hall toward my parents' bedroom, expecting to see one of them there, maybe changing clothes or grabbing something. The bedroom was empty. The bed was untouched. No lights were on. No signs anyone had been there. That's when I pulled my phone out. I called my mom first. She answered at work. I asked her if she had come home for a minute and knocked on the bathroom door. She sounded confused and said no, she was still at work. Then I called my dad. Same answer. Still working, still not home. No chance either of them had been there. The realization hit me all at once. I was alone in the house, and someone had knocked on the bathroom door. I remember feeling this sudden wave of fear rush through my body, like my insides dropped out from under me. My heart started pounding. My hands got clammy. I stood there in the hallway, completely still, listening. That's when I heard movement. It wasn't footsteps in the way you hear shoes hitting the floor. It was subtler than that. My house had old, creaky floors, the kind that made noise even when you tried to walk quietly. I heard that sound coming from the kitchen, that soft, unmistakable creak that only happens when weight shifts on the floorboards. Someone was moving. I didn't stop to investigate. I didn't call out. I didn't think about grabbing anything. Fear took over completely. I ran. I sprinted to my bedroom like my life depended on it. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then backed away from it like the door itself might open on its own. I stood there, barely breathing, listening for any sound. Every tiny noise felt amplified. The house settling, the refrigerator humming, the faint sound of air moving through the vents. I couldn't tell what was real and what my brain was making worse. I stayed in my room like that until my parents got home. I don't know how long it was. It felt like hours, but it was probably closer to 3 or 4. I didn't leave the room. I didn't look out the window. I didn't unlock the door. I sat on my bed, shaking, replaying that knock over and over in my head. When my parents finally came home, I rushed out and told them everything. They checked the house from top to bottom, every door, every window. Nothing was broken, nothing was open, nothing was missing. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs that anyone had been there at all. And that's what made it worse. If something had been broken, if a door had been unlocked, if there had been some clear explanation, maybe I could have accepted it. But there was nothing, just the knock, the sound in the kitchen. and the certainty that I had not imagined it. To this day, I don't know what happened. I've tried to explain it away in every logical way possible. Maybe someone knocked on the front door at the exact same time and the sound traveled. Maybe the house shifted and made a noise that sounded like a knock. Maybe stress or fatigue played tricks on my brain. I've gone over every explanation again and again. None of them fully fit. I know what a knock sounds like. I know the difference between a house noise and a person at the door. And I know I was awake, alert, and not imagining things. The knock was real. The sound in the kitchen was real, and the fear I felt was very real. What still gets me is the timing. The knock happened when I was at my most vulnerable, distracted, and unable to immediately respond. Whoever or whatever it was knew exactly where I was in the house. It wasn't a knock on the front door. It wasn't random. It was right there, inches away from me, separated only by a thin bathroom door. Even now, years later, I still think about it sometimes when I'm home alone. If I hear a sudden noise, my body reacts before my mind does. My heart speeds up. My muscles tense. I become hyper-aware of my surroundings. That moment changed the way I experience being alone. It didn't turn me into someone who believes in ghosts or the supernatural. It didn't give me answers. It just left me with a memory that refuses to settle neatly into logic. And honestly, that's the scariest part. Not knowing, not being able to explain it, just remembering how it felt to sit there, alone in my room, locked in, waiting for my parents to come home, wondering who or what had knocked on the door while I thought I was completely alone. It happened during my university exam period, one of those stretches of time where days blur together and your brain feels like it's constantly running on low battery. I was home alone, studying upstairs in my bedroom, trying to force information into my head that refused to stay there. My dad was at work, and my mom and sister had gone out together to watch a play, so the house was completely empty except for me. That fact alone didn't bother me at first. I'd been home alone plenty of times before. It was winter, the kind of winter day where the light disappears far too early. By late afternoon, it already felt like night. Outside, rain was falling steadily, not violently, but enough to soak everything and dull the usual background sounds. The rain softened the world, made everything feel closed off and isolated. The sound of cars in the distance was muted, the wind barely noticeable. The house felt sealed in its own quiet bubble. I had music playing through my headphones while I studied, not loud enough to drown everything out, but loud enough to help me focus, or at least that was the idea. Our house sits right up against a large stretch of bushland that blends into our backyard. It's not fenced off in a way that would really stop someone determined enough. If someone came from the nearby train station and didn't mind pushing through thick bushes and uneven ground, they could reach our yard without much trouble. That thought had crossed my mind before, but I usually brushed it aside. It felt like one of those unlikely what-if scenarios. I was sitting at my desk, staring at notes I'd already read 10 times. When the song I was listening to ended, there was a brief gap of silence before the next track started. In that quiet moment, I heard something that immediately made my stomach tighten. There was a banging sound downstairs, followed by movement. At first, my brain tried to rationalize it. Houses make noises, pipes shift, wind rattles things. But this wasn't random creaking. It was deliberate, heavy movement. Footsteps. Clear, distinct footsteps moving across our hardwood floors. Anyone who has lived with their family long enough knows this feeling. You recognize the way people walk. You know who is home just by the sound of their steps. My mom's footsteps are light and quick. My sister's are uneven, sometimes rushed. My dad's are steady, familiar. What I was hearing didn't match any of them. These footsteps were heavy, solid. They sounded like work boots, not shoes worn around the house. With every step, I could hear what sounded like bits of mud dropping onto the floor. It was a thick, wet sound, unmistakable once I noticed it. Whoever was walking downstairs sounded like they had just come in from outside, straight off the ground, without bothering to clean their feet. My heart started pounding immediately. I froze at my desk, listening. I told myself not to panic, that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe my dad had come home early, but something felt off. The rhythm of the steps didn't match his. The weight didn't feel right. And why wouldn't he call out to let me know he was home? I slowly took my headphones off and stood up. Every movement felt exaggerated, like my body was suddenly too loud. I moved toward the door and stepped into the hallway. The house felt different now. The warmth of being alone and focused had shifted into something tense and alert. I walked to the top of the staircase and stood there, barely breathing, listening. The footsteps continued, slow, heavy, purposeful. Whoever it was moving through the downstairs area, not rushing, not sneaking exactly, but not casual either. My mind started racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Someone could have come in through the back. The rain would have masked the sound of a door opening. The bushland made it easy to approach unseen. I felt a rush of fear that made my hands shake. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't want to go downstairs, but I also didn't want to hide silently and hope for the best. I needed to do something, without really thinking it through. I took a deep breath and shouted down the stairs, forcing my voice as deep and firm as I could manage. "Go away! There is someone here." The words echoed slightly through the house. For a split second, there was silence. The footsteps stopped. That pause was somehow worse than the sound itself. My mind filled the gap with images of someone listening, deciding what to do next. I clenched my fists, raising them in front of me more out of instinct than confidence. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. I just had adrenaline and fear pushing me forward. Slowly, carefully, I took a few steps down the stairs, moving toward where I had last heard the sound. Every sense felt heightened. I was hyper-aware of the creak of each stair under my feet, the smell of damp air drifting in from downstairs, the quiet hum of the house settling around me. And then I saw him, standing there completely soaked from head to toe, was my father. For a second, my brain didn't register it properly. The fear didn't disappear instantly. It took a moment for recognition to override panic. His jacket was wet, his boots muddy, his hair damp from the rain. He looked tired, surprised, and slightly confused to see me standing there looking like I was ready to fight someone. Relief hit me so hard it almost made my knees weak. I didn't even think about it. I rushed forward and hugged him tightly, the tension draining out of my body all at once. I could feel my heart still racing, but now it was paired with embarrassment and overwhelming relief instead of fear. He asked what was wrong, and I tried to explain through nervous laughter and shaky breaths how terrified I'd been. Apparently he had finished work early and decided to take a shortcut home through the reserve behind our house. Instead of coming in the usual way, he'd cut through the overgrown bush, come in through the back door, and tracked mud across the floor without even thinking about how it might sound to someone upstairs, alone in the house. He hadn't answered when I shouted because he was distracted, tired, and honestly didn't realize how threatening his silence might have felt in that moment. Once the adrenaline fully wore off, the whole situation became almost funny. My family still teases me about it. They joke about how jumpy I am, how alert, how ready I am to assume the worst. They call me overly security conscious, like it's a personality flaw. But even now, I don't see it that way. That moment taught me how fast your sense of safety can disappear. How quickly an ordinary house can feel unfamiliar and dangerous. How your brain fills in gaps when you don't have all the information. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I heard footsteps that didn't match anyone I expected to be home, in a house that backs onto an area where someone really could enter unnoticed. Looking back, I'm glad my instinct was to stay alert instead of brushing it off. I'd rather feel a little embarrassed over reacting than regret not reacting enough. Being aware of your surroundings doesn't mean you're paranoid. Sometimes it just means you're paying attention. That night ended safely with a simple misunderstanding and a good story, but the feeling of standing at the top of those stairs, heart pounding, convinced there was someone downstairs who didn't belong there, is something I still remember clearly. It's a reminder that being cautious isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just being human. When I was 18 years old, I left Kentucky and moved to Kansas for college. At that point in my life, everything felt new and unfamiliar. I had never lived that far from home before, and even though I was excited, there was also a quiet nervousness underneath it all. In July or August, my parents drove me and all my belongings out to campus. We unpacked, said our goodbyes, and then they got back in the car and drove home, leaving me there on my own. For the first couple of months, I didn't have a car on campus. I got around on foot, by bus, or with friends. It felt temporary, like I was still settling in, still figuring out what this new chapter of my life was going to look like. When Thanksgiving came around, I flew back home to Kentucky. While I was there, I decided to drive my car back to Kansas instead of flying again. The drive was long, about 8.5 hours, straight across on Interstate 64 and then Interstate 70. It was a route I didn't know well, but it was mostly highway, mostly flat, mostly uneventful. I left later in the day than I probably should have. And by the time I was well into the drive, it was already dark. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional passing car. Driving alone at night has a strange feeling to it. You're alert, but also a little disconnected, like the world has narrowed down to the road and your thoughts. At some point in the middle of the night, I got hungry and tired. I saw a sign for a Denny's and decided to pull off the highway. It felt comforting in a way, seeing a familiar restaurant logo glowing in the dark. Somewhere you could count on being open, no matter the hour. I parked, went inside, and got some food. I don't remember exactly what I ordered, just that it was warm and filling, and it helped wake me up a bit. After I finished eating, I walked back outside and realized I needed gas. Across the road from the Denny's was an old gas station. Even at the time, it looked outdated. The pumps were ancient, the kind you didn't see much anymore. The paint was faded, the signs were worn, and everything about the place felt like it belonged to another era. Still, the lights were on, and the station was clearly open. I pulled in. An old man was working there. He looked like he had been there forever, like the station and the man belonged together. He even came out to the full-service lane and filled up my car for me, something that already felt unusual by that point in time. When he finished pumping the gas, I handed him my credit card. He told me I would have to come inside to pay. That didn't strike me as odd, so I went in. While I was there, I grabbed a soda from the cooler. Inside, the place felt just as old as it looked from the outside. The counter was worn smooth, and the equipment behind it looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The man ran my card through one of those old machines with the paper slide, the kind that made an imprint of the card on carbon paper. He tore off the slip and handed it to me to sign. I signed it, took my soda, thanked him, and left. The whole interaction felt normal at the time. Maybe a little old-fashioned, but not alarming. I got back in my car, pulled out of the station, and continued my drive toward Kansas. A while later, I thought about the gas purchase and realized something strange. The $20 for the gas never showed up on my credit card statement. I checked again later, thinking maybe it was delayed because of the old machine. I figured it might process at the end of the month or something. It didn't seem worth worrying about. It was only $20. So I let it go. Weeks passed. Classes continued. Life settled into a routine. The gas station became just another forgotten stop on a long drive. Then Christmas break came around. I decided to drive home again, this time with my car. One of my roommates mentioned that his family was out of the country for the holidays, so I invited him to come home with me. We packed up and hit the road together. We were driving during the day this time, and everything felt lighter. There was conversation, the music, and the comfort of having someone else in the car. At some point he mentioned he was hungry. I told him I knew there was a Denny's up the road. I remembered it clearly, same place I had stopped on my way out. So we pulled off the highway. As soon as we exited, I recognized it. There was the Denny's, just like before. Then I looked across the road. The gas station was there too, but it wasn't the same. It was boarded up. The pumps were gone or broken down. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the pavement. The place looked abandoned, like it had been closed for a long time. There were no lights on, no sign of anyone working there. It looked dead. I felt a strange knot form in my stomach. We parked and went inside the Denny's. As we sat down, I couldn't stop thinking about the gas station. It didn't make sense. I knew I had stopped there. I remembered the old man. I remembered him filling my car. I remembered the credit card machine. It wasn't vague. It was clear. When the waitress came by, I asked her about the gas station across the road. I asked when it had closed. She didn't hesitate. She told me it had been closed for 4 or 5 years. She explained that it was too expensive to put new tanks in the ground, so the owner had shut it down. According to her, it hadn't been operating in a long time. I just stared at her. My roommate looked at me like I had lost my mind when I told him I had literally stopped and gotten gas there about a month earlier in the middle of the night. I could tell he didn't believe me. To him, it sounded impossible. The station clearly hadn't been open recently. Anyone could see that. I tried to explain the details. The old pumps, the old man, the credit card slip, the fact that the charge never showed up. The more I talked, the crazier it sounded. After we got home, I told my family the story. They listened, then brushed it off. They told me I must have gotten off at the wrong exit, that I was tired, that I probably mixed up 2 different places. They said memory can be unreliable, especially when you're driving long distances late at night. I understood why they said that. It was the easiest explanation, the most logical one, but it didn't sit right with me. I'm usually pretty good with details when I'm driving. I remember exits. I remember landmarks. I remember the flow of the road. This wasn't a fuzzy memory. It felt solid. What bothered me the most was how real it all felt at the time. The interaction, the man, the process of paying, the fact that the gas charge never went through. It all lined up in a way that made it hard to dismiss completely. Even now, years later, the story still creeps me out. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that makes me think something supernatural definitely happened, but in a quiet, lingering way that doesn't fully go away. The kind of unease that comes from knowing you experienced something that doesn't quite fit and never getting a satisfying explanation for it. Sometimes I think about that old man. I wonder who he was. I wonder if he was real at all, or if I somehow filled in details without realizing it. I wonder how I could have been so sure, only to find out the place wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I don't claim to know what happened. Maybe I really did stop at a different exit and mixed the 2 places together in my mind. Maybe exhaustion played tricks on me. Maybe memory smoothed over gaps in a way that made it feel more real than it was. but the feeling hasn't changed. That moment standing in the Denny's during daylight, looking out the window at a boarded-up station that I was certain had been open weeks earlier, still sends a chill through me. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the feeling of realizing that sometimes reality doesn't line up the way you expect it to. That sometimes you can be sure of something, down to the smallest detail, and still be wrong. Or worse, still be right in a way that doesn't make sense. And that thought still unsettles me more than almost anything else. Around the time I was about 14 years old, my family moved into a very old house. It was a turn-of-the-century place, the kind of house that already feels like it has a history the moment you see it. My parents still live there to this day. That period of my life was already difficult, even without the house. My family was going through a rough time, and on top of that, we were moving away from my grandparents' house. I loved living there. It felt safe and warm and familiar. It was also close to all my best friends. Leaving that behind felt like being pulled out of the only stable place I had. The new house couldn't have been more different. It was run down, huge, and honestly kind of intimidating. It looked like a castle that had been forgotten. It sat far away from everything I knew. No friends nearby, no familiar places, just this massive old structure in the middle of nowhere. We didn't even move in right away. For about a year, my family would make regular day trips to the house. My parents would work on it all day, fixing things, cleaning, repairing, while my brother and I tried to find ways not to be bored out of our minds. Those trips felt endless. The house wasn't livable at first. There were problems everywhere. It took months and months of work just to make it safe and functional. When we finally did move in, I hated it. I really did. I hated the distance. I hated the isolation. I hated how big and empty it felt. I hated how quiet it was at night. At that age, everything already feels intense, and that house made it worse. Even though I love it now, back then it felt like a punishment. Over the years, a lot of weird things happened in that house. Some of it I can explain, some of it I can't, and some of it I honestly think had more to do with being a teenager than anything else. We eventually got dogs, more than one over the years, and sometimes they would wake us up in the middle of the night, barking at absolutely nothing, just standing there, staring at an empty corner, hackles raised, barking like someone was standing right in front of them. My brother swears he saw a ghost there once. To this day, he insists it happened. What makes that more interesting is that he's now a grown adult and a self-described atheist. He's not someone who wants to believe in that kind of thing. There were strange noises, too. Footsteps when no one was there. Creaks and sounds that didn't quite match the normal settling of an old house. And then there were the feelings. That sense of being watched, or that sudden chill for no clear reason. Kids at school made it worse. They told me the house was haunted. They said it had sat abandoned for years before we moved in. They claimed they had seen lights turning on and off when no one was supposed to be there. Whether any of that was true or just stories passed around to scare each other, I don't know. Looking back now, I think a lot of that time can be explained by puberty, stress, and being thrown into a completely new environment. I don't really believe in ghosts. I never have. In fact, I've intentionally gone looking for them before, just to prove to myself that nothing would happen. Most of the strange things at that house never really stuck with me, except for one. This happened during one of those long work trips before we officially moved in. My parents were busy inside the house, working on something. My brother and I were outside, doing kid stuff, trying to entertain ourselves. There was this small porch on the house that we still don't even use to this day. It sits right outside the kitchen. It's about 15 feet by 15 feet, raised maybe 4 feet off the ground. It overlooks a highway, but it's kind of pointless because there's a much nicer porch with a roof just 20 feet away that has a better view and is actually comfortable. This porch has always felt like an afterthought, like someone added it for a reason that no longer mattered. On this particular day, I was sitting out there by myself. I don't remember exactly what I was doing. I might have been reading. I might have been sitting there with a BB gun, waiting to shoot starlings, which were everywhere back then, probably a bit of both. My brother was nearby, maybe 15 feet away, picking wild blueberries. He was about 7 years old at the time, completely focused on what he was doing, not paying much attention to anything else. It was a normal afternoon, quiet, nothing strange about it at all. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice. It wasn't faint, it wasn't distant, it wasn't unclear, it was perfectly clear. A voice spoke and said, "Hey you, can you see me? Hey?" That was it. No echo, no follow-up. Just those words, spoken plainly, like someone was trying to get my attention. I froze. The first thing that hit me wasn't fear. It was confusion. My brain immediately started trying to place the sound. Where did it come from? Who could it be? Had someone walked up without me noticing? I looked around. There was no one there. The highway was visible, but the sound hadn't come from that direction. It was too close, too direct. It felt like it had come from right near the porch, like someone standing just out of sight. After a second, I asked my brother if he had heard it. He said yes. That's the part that still gets me. He didn't react. He didn't seem scared. He didn't even seem curious. He just confirmed that he had heard it and then went right back to picking blueberries like nothing had happened. I remember standing there waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the voice to speak again, waiting for someone to appear, but nothing did. The air felt normal. The light didn't change. There was no movement, just silence. I didn't tell my parents right away. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't even know what I thought had happened. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't aggressive. It didn't feel threatening. It just felt wrong. Over the years, I've thought about that moment a lot. I've tried to explain it away. Maybe it was someone on the highway. Maybe sound carried strangely that day. Maybe a neighbor's voice traveled in a way that made it seem closer than it was. But none of those explanations fully satisfy me. What makes it stand out is how clear the voice was, how intentional it sounded, how it seemed to be directed at me specifically. And the fact that my brother heard it too removes the easiest explanation of imagination or mishearing. What also makes it strange is how it ended. No build-up, no aftermath, no explanation, just a voice asking to be seen, and then nothing. Yeah, I've read stories over the years about people disappearing, about strange encounters, about things that don't fit into normal categories. I don't know if any of that applies here. I'm not trying to turn this into something it wasn't. I don't think it was a ghost. I don't think it was something supernatural in the dramatic sense, but I also don't think it was nothing. That moment has stayed with me longer than most of the truly scary stories I've heard or read. Maybe because it was so simple. Maybe because it didn't try to scare me. Maybe because it felt unfinished, like a question that never got answered. Even now, when I visit that house, I sometimes glance at that little porch. It looks the same, quiet, unused, forgettable. But I remember sitting there. I remember the sound of that voice. And I remember how strange it felt to hear something that, clearly, with no source. Out of all the weird things that happened around that house, that was the creepiest moment of my life. Not because it proved anything, but because it didn't. When I was a teenager, I was having a sleepover with my friends at my house. It was the kind of night that felt exciting just because we were allowed to stay up late, talk, eat junk food, and feel like the world was bigger than it usually felt during the day. There was nothing special planned. We were just hanging out, looking for ways to entertain ourselves. At some point during the night, someone suggested pulling out my grandmother's old Ouija board. This wasn't a new board you buy at a store. It was old, really old. The kind of thing that had clearly been around long before any of us were born. The box was worn. The board itself had that yellowed, aged look, like it had absorbed decades of air and handling. Even before we touched it, it felt different from the plastic ones you see today. There were 3 of us there. There was me. There was my best friend, Amber, who I had known forever and trusted completely. And then there was another girl. She wasn't really a close friend. She was more of a mutual acquaintance, someone we only invited because circumstances made it awkward not to. The main thing about her was that she was very easily scared, and unfortunately for her, that became part of the entertainment. We weren't taking the Ouija board seriously at all. We were teenagers, bored and a little cruel in that careless way kids can be without meaning real harm. We started fooling around, acting like the board was possessed, exaggerating movements, making jokes, trying to freak her out. She was clearly uncomfortable, jumping at small noises, watching the board too closely, looking like she regretted coming over at all. We thought it was funny at the time, even though looking back now, it probably wasn't our best moment. The mood was playful, chaotic, and loud. There was no quiet reverence, no serious intent, just joking and pushing buttons. In the middle of all this, Amber suddenly paused. She reached into her bag and pulled out a baggie of candy we had just bought from the corner store earlier that night. Inside the bag was a sealed package of those little candy hearts with messages printed on them. Sweethearts, or something like that. The kind you see around Valentine's Day with phrases like, "Be mine," or "Call me." At the same time, it became obvious that the other girl wasn't just playfully scared anymore. She was genuinely unsettled. Her face had gone pale. She looked tense, like she was trying not to panic. The fun was starting to cross into something else. We felt kind of bad. The joking started to slow down. The laughter faded. There was this awkward pause where no one quite knew what to say next. That's when I said it. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of, if a spirit was really here, it would make its presence known to us. I didn't say it dramatically. I didn't say it like a challenge. It was more of a dismissive comment, meant to reassure everyone, including myself, that nothing was actually happening. 3 seconds later, something happened that changed the entire night. Amber's sealed pack of candy hearts ripped open. It wasn't dramatic. There was no loud tear or explosion. It just split, like the packaging had been weakened somehow. A few of the candy hearts spilled out and fell directly onto the Ouija board. We all froze. The room went completely silent. No one moved. No one laughed. No one said a word, because every single candy heart that had fallen onto the board had the same message printed on it. Ready, Amber? Not similar phrases, not variations, not different words that could be read together. Each one said exactly the same thing. Ready, Amber? The name mattered. Amber was sitting right there. The odds of that happening hit us all at once. We stared at the hearts, then at each other, then back at the board. My heart was racing. I felt cold, like all the warmth had drained out of the room. The other girl looked like she was about to cry. No one touched anything for a long moment. Then panic set in. We were freaked out beyond anything we had expected. There was no more joking, no more pretending. The board suddenly felt very real, very heavy. Like it was something we shouldn't be near. We pushed everything away, closed the board, and shoved it back where it came from. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't ask another question. We didn't try to explain it away in the moment. We never touched the Ouija board again. That was it. The rest of the night was tense and uncomfortable. None of us slept well. Every small noise made us jump. The mood never recovered. The sleepover ended early the next morning, and everyone left with that unspoken understanding that something had happened, even if we didn't know what. What made it worse was what came after. We tried to prove it was a coincidence. For months afterward, Amber and I bought those candy hearts over and over again, multiple times a week sometimes. We opened package after package looking for that same message. We were desperate to find another heart that said "Ready, Amber," because if we could, it would mean that night had been nothing more than bad timing. We never found one. Not once. We found every other message imaginable, but never that one again. Not even close. That made it harder to let go. I kept the candy hearts. I still have them to this day. It's been close to 20 years now. Time has worn them down. The paint has faded. The raised lettering has rubbed away from being handled and stored for so long. The message isn't as clear as it once was, but it's still there if you look closely. Every time I see them, I feel that same chill. I'm not someone who believes easily. I don't go looking for supernatural explanations. I know how coincidences work. I know that strange things can happen without meaning anything deeper. Yeah, but that night wasn't just strange. It was specific. It was timed perfectly. It used a name. It responded directly to something that had just been said. And it happened in a moment where we had been treating something lightly that maybe shouldn't have been treated that way. What scares me the most isn't the idea that a spirit answered us. What scares me is how fast the atmosphere changed, how quickly fun turned into fear, how something so small, a few pieces of candy, could carry so much weight. I don't think whatever happened was evil. It didn't threaten us, it didn't harm us, it didn't escalate, it just responded, and then it stopped. That's what stays with me. Out of all the weird things I've experienced, all the unsettling moments that can be explained away or dismissed, this one still sits differently in my mind. Because it didn't rely on shadows or imagination or fear of the dark. It relied on timing, detail, and a name. And even now, decades later, that still freaks me out. Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling. One night, I woke up to a sound that didn't make sense right away. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. It was one of those moments where you're not fully awake yet, and your brain tries to explain away whatever is happening as imagination. The sound was loud but distant in a strange way, like it hadn't fully reached my awareness yet. Then I woke up more. That's when I realized the sound was real. There was an extremely steady, consistent banging coming from my window. It wasn't random. It wasn't uneven. It wasn't the kind of noise you get from wind or branches or something loose hitting the side of the house. It had a rhythm, a perfect mechanical rhythm. It never sped up. It never slowed down. It never missed a beat. Whatever was making that noise was doing it deliberately. My first clear thought was that it had to be a person. Nothing else made sense. The sound was too controlled, too intentional. Each bang landed exactly where the last one had, with the same force over and over again. It sounded like someone standing outside my window, hitting it again and again with their hand or an object. My heart started pounding. For a split second, I considered pulling back the curtain and looking outside. That instinct lasted maybe half a second before fear shut it down completely. I remember thinking very clearly that there was no way I was going to look at that window alone in the middle of the night. So I did the only thing that made sense. I jumped out of bed and ran to my mom's room. The banging didn't stop while I was running. It didn't hesitate. It didn't react to my movement. It just kept going, steady and relentless. I shook my mom awake, probably harder than necessary, and tried to explain what was happening. Even before I finished speaking, we could both hear it clearly from her room. The sound was loud enough that it traveled through the house. It wasn't faint or distant. It felt close, urgent, invasive. The banging continued, never missing a beat. What made it even worse was how strong it was. It wasn't just noise. The impact was so intense that it made the windows in the house shake. You could feel it through the walls, like vibrations moving through the structure. Even though the sound seemed centered near my room, it affected everything around it. My mom got up, clearly scared but trying to stay calm. We went back to my room together. The banging was still happening, just as strong as before. My window was visibly shaking. I stood there watching it move. I half expecting the glass to shatter at any moment. My mom looked directly at the window. There was nothing there. No person, no shadow, no movement outside at all. That made everything worse. If there had been someone there, even someone dangerous, it would have at least made sense. But the window was empty, and yet the sound continued. Perfectly steady, like something unseen was striking it over and over. We stood there for a few seconds, frozen, listening. Then my mom said something that shifted everything. She said maybe the sound was coming from outside the house, not directly from the window. That thought immediately sent my fear in a new direction. My mind jumped to the worst possible explanations. For a brief moment, I honestly thought we were being bombed or attacked, like something massive was happening just beyond our understanding. The intensity of the sound made my imagination run wild. We decided to go outside. I don't know how we worked up the courage, but we did. We grabbed coats and stepped out into the night. The moment we were outside, everything changed. There was complete silence. No banging, no vibration, no noise at all. The night air was still, calm, normal. We looked around, trying to locate the source. The house stood there quietly, looking exactly the same as it always did. Nothing seemed out of place. No lights, no movement, no sign that anything strange had been happening moments before. That's when we realized something was very wrong. If the sound wasn't coming from outside, then it had to be coming from inside the house. We went back inside. The moment we stepped back into my room, the banging was there again. Same rhythm, same intensity, same relentless pace. But now, standing there and listening more carefully, we noticed something important. It wasn't the window, it was the vent directly below my window. The sound was coming from inside the vent. That vent led down into the basement, and the only way to access that part of the basement was from outside the house. It was 3 a.m. There was no chance either of us was going down there. My mom didn't even suggest it. The idea was unspoken but understood. There was no way we were opening the basement at that hour, not with that sound coming from it. Instead, she called my dad. He was working nights at the time, so he wasn't home. She tried to explain what was happening over the phone, but even saying it out loud made it sound strange. Steady banging, windows shaking, coming from the vent, no visible cause. He didn't have an answer either. Eventually, we did what people do when they're scared and don't know what else to do. We tried to explain it away. We told ourselves it was pipes, pressure, air movement, something mechanical, something boring and harmless that just happened to sound terrifying in the middle of the night. The banging eventually stopped. I don't remember exactly when it ended. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over because we went back to bed and slept, even though sleep didn't come easily. The next day, everything was normal. No damage, no explanation, no sign that anything had happened at all. We never figured out what caused it. Over the years, we've had the house inspected. Professionals have looked at the vents, the pipes, the structure. Everything appears to be fine. There's no obvious mechanical issue that explains that kind of sound, especially one so steady and forceful. And yet, it still happens sometimes, not often, not predictably, just enough to remind us that it exists. Whenever it happens, the same feeling comes back, that tightness in the chest, that sense that something is happening just outside of understanding. It never feels random. It never feels natural. What bothers me most isn't the sound itself anymore. It's the precision, the fact that it never misses a beat, the fact that it doesn't react, the fact that it feels intentional, even though I don't know what that intention could be. I don't believe there's something living in the vent. I don't believe there's some creature or entity hiding in the basement. I don't jump to supernatural conclusions, but I also can't fully accept that it's nothing, because I know what I heard. I know how it felt. I know how strong it was. And I know the look on my mom's face when she realized it wasn't coming from where it should have been. Sometimes the scariest experiences aren't the ones where you see something impossible. They're the ones where everything stays invisible, unexplained, and just close enough to feel personal. That night still sticks with me, not because I think something was trying to hurt us, but because whatever it was, it made itself known, and then refused to explain itself. A couple of months ago, I was upstairs in my house doing something completely ordinary. I was sitting there playing Manhunt 2 on my old PS2, just killing time, focused on the screen, not thinking about anything outside the room. It was one of those quiet moments where you're fully absorbed in what you're doing and the rest of the world fades out. Then I heard something that didn't fit. At first, it sounded like thunder. That low, deep rumble you hear during a storm, the kind that makes the windows vibrate a little. I barely reacted at first. Thunder happens. It wasn't enough to pull me out of what I was doing, but then it kept going. The sound didn't fade. It didn't roll away. It didn't break into separate claps like thunder normally does. It just continued. A deep, booming noise that stayed constant, like something massive was pounding the air over and over again. I paused the game and listened. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like a car's stereo turned up way too loud, blasting bass non-stop. You could feel it more than hear it. The sound had weight. It pressed against the house, against my chest, against everything, and it would not stop. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Thunder doesn't do that. Storms don't sound like that. This was steady, powerful, and unnatural. It felt mechanical, violent, like something was happening instead of just weather passing through. I went downstairs and then outside to see what was going on. The moment I stepped out, my stomach dropped. In the distance, there were huge explosions. The sky wasn't dark the way it usually is at night. It was lit up in orange and red, flashing again and again, like massive fireballs were going off somewhere just beyond the trees. Every explosion was followed by that same deep, booming sound, shaking the air and the ground beneath my feet. It didn't look real. It looked like something out of a movie. Not a modern movie either, but an old war film, the kind where entire cities are being bombed. The sound was overwhelming. It echoed across the landscape, filling everything. I ran back inside and grabbed my mom and sister. I don't even remember what I said exactly. Something urgent, something panicked. I just knew they had to see this. Whatever was happening, it was big and it was close enough to feel. We got in the car and drove toward the noise, trying to figure out what was going on. As we got closer, the scene became even more terrifying. We reached a spot by a lake. On the other side of the water, the town across the lake looked like it was burning to the ground. Thick smoke was rising into the sky. Huge flames were visible behind the line of trees, lighting everything up in harsh, flickering colors. The explosions kept coming, one after another, each one powerful enough to make us flinch. It sounded exactly like what you hear in war movies. Deep, heavy blasts that don't sound like fireworks or accidents, but like destruction on a massive scale. My first thought was that we were under attack. I know how dramatic that sounds, but in that moment, it didn't feel dramatic at all. It felt logical. The scale of what we were seeing didn't match anything else my brain could come up with. The world doesn't usually explode like that without a reason. I remember standing there, staring across the lake, trying to understand how something like that could be happening. My heart was racing, my thoughts were spiraling. I was trying to imagine what we were supposed to do next. Where do you go when something like that is happening? How do you protect yourself from something you don't understand? It felt like the ground had dropped out from under reality. Everything I had ever associated with safety, with normal life, with the idea that things don't just suddenly fall apart, was gone in that moment. The world felt fragile in a way I had never felt before. We didn't stay long. Fear took over completely. Whatever was happening, we didn't want to be closer to it. We raced back home, the sound of explosions still echoing behind us, lighting up the sky even as we drove away. Back at the house, we waited. The explosions continued for a while, then slowly started to space out. The sky eventually darkened again. The sound faded. The world seemed to calm down, but the tension didn't leave right away. Eventually, we found out what had really happened. A propane plant had exploded. The massive booms we had heard were propane tanks blowing up one after another. The flames, the smoke, the light in the sky, all of it came from that. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't the end of the world. It was an industrial disaster, terrible and dangerous, but explainable. Looking back now, it doesn't seem as scary. I can say that calmly because I know what it was. I know there was a cause. I know there was an explanation. I know we weren't in immediate danger in the way my mind had imagined. But at the time, it was horrible. The fear didn't come from what was actually happening. It came from not knowing, from seeing something massive and violent and having no context for it, from standing there and realizing that the world can change in an instant without warning and without asking if you're ready. That night stuck with me because it showed me how thin the line is between normal life and absolute chaos. One minute I was upstairs playing a video game, completely disconnected from everything else. The next, I was watching a town across a lake light up like it was being destroyed, convinced that something unimaginable was unfolding right in front of us. Even though I can explain it now, even though it no longer feels mysterious or supernatural, the memory still carries that same weight. Because fear doesn't care about explanations. Fear lives in the moment before you understand. And for those minutes standing by that lake, listening to the sky explode, I truly believed that the world I knew was ending. When I was somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, my parents owned a piece of property in a very small town. It wasn't anything fancy, just land, open space, a place we would go to get away from everything. We used to camp there instead of staying in a house. It felt like a little escape from the rest of the world. What I remember most clearly about that place was how dark it got at night. There was almost no light pollution at all. No streetlights nearby, no city glow on the horizon. When the sky was clear, the stars were unbelievably bright. They didn't look flat the way they do near towns or cities. They looked deep, layered, like you could fall into them if you stared long enough. As a kid, I loved that. I would wander around the property at night, staying close enough that my parents could call me if they needed to, but far enough that I felt alone. The land was about an acre or two, mostly open field, nothing tall, nothing blocking the view of the sky. One night I was standing out in the field by myself, looking up. I remember the air being calm. No strong wind, no strange sounds, just that quiet you only get far away from everything else. I was lying back, or maybe standing still, staring straight up, completely focused on the stars. That's when I noticed something different. At first, it was just a bright light in the distance. It wasn't directly overhead. It was off at an angle, maybe about 45 degrees from where I was standing. It looked like a star at first, but something about it felt wrong. It was brighter than the others, sharper. I kept watching it. Then I realized it was getting bigger, not slowly, quickly. The light wasn't just moving across the sky the way satellites or planes do. It was coming toward me. The change in size happened fast enough that my brain had trouble catching up. 1 second it looked distant. The next it felt close enough that my body reacted. Within seconds, more lights appeared. There were about 6 of them. They were bright and evenly spaced, moving together as one object. They weren't blinking the way plane lights usually do. They were steady, white or slightly yellow, hard to tell, but very clear against the dark sky. They were flying incredibly fast. Whatever it was passed directly over me, maybe 200 or 300 feet above. Close enough that I could see the spacing clearly, close enough that I should have heard something, but there was no sound, no engine noise, no wind, no hum, nothing. The size of it hit me all at once. Judging by how far apart the lights were, it had to have had a wingspan of over 100 feet, maybe more. It was massive, bigger than anything I had ever seen in the sky before, especially at that height. As it went over me, I turned my head to follow it, and then it was gone, not fading away, not shrinking back into the distance, just gone. I remember standing there, frozen, staring at the sky behind me, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. There was nothing where it had been. No trailing lights, no sound, no movement, just stars again, bright and silent, like nothing had happened at all. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. I don't remember calling for my parents right away. I think I was too confused for fear to kick in properly. My brain didn't know what to do with the experience. Even at that age, I knew it didn't fit. Planes didn't move like that. They weren't silent. They didn't appear out of nowhere, grow rapidly in size, pass overhead, and then vanish instantly. Helicopters were loud. Jets were loud. Even distant aircraft made some kind of noise. This made none. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I've gone over the memory again and again as I've gotten older, trying to apply adult logic to it. I've considered military aircraft, experimental planes, optical illusions, misjudging distance or size, but none of those explanations fully satisfy me. The silence is the hardest part to explain. The speed, the way it seemed to approach directly rather than crossing the sky, and the way it disappeared so suddenly, me without any visible continuation of its path. I don't jump straight to calling it a UFO. I don't say it was aliens. I don't pretend to know something extraordinary happened for sure, but I also can't say it was nothing. The memory has stayed incredibly clear over the years, not blurry the way most childhood memories are. I can still picture the angle of the sky, the brightness of the lights, the spacing between them, and the moment when I turned and found nothing behind me. What sticks with me most is how alone I was in that moment, standing in the middle of a dark field under a sky full of stars, watching something massive and silent pass overhead without explanation. There was no one else to confirm it, no one else looking up at the same time, no camera, no proof, just me, the sky, and something I still can't explain. As an adult, that's what unsettles me the most. Not fear, not belief, just the unanswered question. Because whatever it was real enough to leave a mark that never faded. And even now, decades later, When I look up at a dark sky filled with stars, part of me still wonders what the hell flew over my head that night. This happened one Thanksgiving, and even now, years later, it's one of those memories that comes back to me in flashes. Not because it was loud or violent or dramatic, but because of how quietly wrong it felt. The kind of wrong that sinks into your chest slowly, piece by piece, until you realize you're standing in the middle of something you were never meant to see. That Thanksgiving was already sad before anything strange happened. I was having dinner with my girlfriend at the time and her mother. My girlfriend was a little unpredictable, the kind of person who lived half in her own world. Her mother was lonely in a way that felt heavy, like it filled the house. The house itself matched the mood. Quiet, dim, a little neglected. Nothing felt warm or celebratory. The dinner was mostly store-bought. Things heated up and placed on plates without much care. There was no extended family, no laughter, no background noise from a TV or music, just the three of us sitting there, going through the motions of what Thanksgiving was supposed to be. It felt hollow. Then the doorbell rang. That alone felt strange. Nobody was expected. Nobody ever really visited. When her mother opened the door, we saw 2 police officers standing there. They were polite but serious, the way officers are when they're doing routine work, but still dealing with something that might turn into a problem. They explained that there had been a van parked around the corner for several days. Neighbors had complained. As they went door to door asking questions, a few people mentioned that the van had been parked in front of my girlfriend's mother's house before, off and on. They wanted to know if she knew anything about it. Her mother immediately said no. Her voice was steady, too steady in hindsight. She told them she had no idea who owned the van or why it would be there. The officers thanked her, took a few notes, and left. The door closed. The house went quiet again. Then her mother turned to me. The look on her face had completely changed. The calm was gone. Her eyes were wide, her skin pale. She leaned closer and lowered her voice, even though there was no one else in the house. "Oh my God," she said. "You have to check the basement." There was something in the way she said it that made my stomach tighten immediately. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't suspicion. This was fear mixed with realization. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the basement stairs. The basement was unfinished, dark, and smelled faintly of damp concrete and old air. The kind of basement you don't go into unless you have to. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I went down. Her mother followed me, staying close behind, nervously scanning the shadows. We moved slowly, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness in narrow slices. The basement wasn't large, but it was cluttered. Old boxes, storage shelves, a boiler humming softly in the background. Then we reached a small subsection of the basement. The flashlight beam landed on something that didn't belong. There was a mattress on the floor. Not a new one, not a guest mattress. An old, worn mattress, stained and sagging, with dirty blankets thrown across it. Nearby, an extension cord ran from a single bare light bulb down to a small television sitting on the floor. The scene hit all at once. This wasn't storage. This was a living space. Before I could even say anything, her mother gasped. She covered her mouth, then whispered, "Oh my God, he's been living down here." Her voice cracked. She turned and ran back up the stairs, panic taking over completely. As she ran, she started yelling up toward the kitchen, asking if I had found anything. Her voice echoed through the basement, loud and frantic. I stayed where I was. I kept looking around. The more I looked, the clearer it became. There were food wrappers scattered around, empty bottles, half-eaten pizza boxes pushed against the wall, signs of someone trying to live quietly, hidden away, surviving on scraps. but there was no one in sight. At least, not at first. My heart was pounding now, but not in a dramatic way. It was a slow, heavy thump, like my body knew something my brain hadn't fully processed yet. I moved carefully, scanning every corner with the flashlight. Then I walked around the boiler. There was a narrow space behind it, maybe 12 inches wide between the boiler and the wall, a place you wouldn't even think to look unless you were already on edge. I aimed the flashlight into that space, and there he was. A scrawny man stood there, pressed into the narrow gap. He was unshaven, his face gaunt and pale. He was wearing only his boxers, no shirt, no shoes, nothing else. He looked terrified. His eyes were wide, locked onto mine, reflecting the flashlight beam. His body was tense, frozen like an animal caught in a trap. One finger was pressed against his lips. "Shh," he whispered. I felt my blood run cold. For a split second, my mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then recognition hit me, slow and horrible. It was my girlfriend's uncle. I barely recognized him at first because of how far gone he looked. He was clearly on drugs. His body was thin, his movements twitchy, his expression a mix of fear and desperation. This wasn't someone hiding for fun. This was someone who had nowhere else to go. He didn't move. He didn't speak again. He just stood there, shaking slightly, begging me with his eyes to stay quiet. Above us, I could hear her mother yelling again from the top of the stairs, asking if I had found anything. In that moment, I made a decision that still sits with me. I didn't want to completely destroy what little was left of that Thanksgiving. I didn't want to send her mother into full panic. I didn't want to create a scene that would spiral out of control right then and there. So I did the strangest thing. I turned off the flashlight. I walked back toward the stairs. When I reached the top, her mother was standing there, shaking, tears in her eyes, asking me what I saw. I told her there was nobody down there. The relief on her face was immediate, mixed with confusion. She didn't fully believe me, but she wanted to. She needed to. She sat back down at the table, trying to steady herself. Later, when things had calmed down, I told my girlfriend the truth. I told her I had seen her uncle. I told her he was living in the basement. I told her about the mattress, the food, the hiding place behind the boiler. She went quiet when I said his name. She already knew he was struggling. She already knew he had disappeared from the family's life. None of it surprised her as much as it should have. But it surprised me, not just because he was there, but because of how he looked at me. That image has never left my mind. A grown man, broken down to nothing, hiding behind a boiler in his sister's basement, terrified of being found. That look wasn't threatening, it wasn't angry, it was pure fear. I think about that moment sometimes when I remember that Thanksgiving. Not the sad dinner, not the police at the door, not even the discovery of the makeshift living space. I think about that man standing in the dark, half naked, pressing himself into a space barely wide enough to breathe, begging silently not to be seen. It was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed, not because it was supernatural, not because it was violent, but because it was real, because it showed me how close fear, desperation, and secrecy can exist right under your feet, without you ever knowing, because it reminded me that some of the most horrifying moments in life don't involve monsters or ghosts. They involve people who have fallen so far that hiding becomes the only way they know how to survive. And that image, that finger to the lips, that terrified look in his eyes, is something I will never forget. About a year ago, I woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling that something was wrong. There was no noise that pulled me out of sleep, no dream that suddenly ended. It was just a deep sense of unease that snapped me awake, the kind that doesn't come with a clear reason but feels urgent anyway. I remember checking the time later and realizing it was around 1 in the morning. At first, I lay still, trying to understand why I was awake. My room was dark, quiet, exactly the way it should have been. Nothing appeared out of place. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. That's when I looked toward my bedroom door. There was someone standing there. He was turned away from me, facing the door, with his back to my bed. He wasn't moving. He wasn't shifting his weight or adjusting his stance. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like he had always been there and would continue to be there whether I noticed him or not. I didn't scream. I didn't move. For a second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of the dark, something created by the way the light from outside hit the room. But the shape was too clear. I remember his appearance in detail, even now. He was tall. His outline was solid, not fuzzy or fading the way shadows usually are. He wore a bowler hat, the kind you don't see people wear anymore. He had on a long coat that hung straight down, heavy and structured, and I could see the shape of black shoes at the bottom. I never saw his face. That part stands out to me the most. He never turned around. He never looked at me. It was as if he didn't need to. The room felt different with him there. Not colder exactly, but heavier, like the air had thickened. I was aware of my breathing, slow and shallow, like my body was trying not to make any noise. Before I could really process what I was seeing, something strange happened. I felt overwhelmingly tired, not normal tired, not the kind where you roll over and drift back to sleep. It was sudden and intense, like someone had flipped a switch. My limbs felt heavy. My thoughts slowed. The fear that had been building in my chest dulled, not because it faded, but because my body stopped responding to it properly. I remember thinking that I needed to stay awake. Then I couldn't. I passed out. The next thing I remember is being woken up again. This time, it was different. I wasn't waking up on my own. Someone was there, close to me, too close. I could feel their presence before I fully opened my eyes. When I did, my brother was standing beside my bed. His face was only a few inches from mine. He was saying my name over and over again. There was something wrong in the way he was saying it. His voice was flat, distant, like he wasn't fully there. He wasn't asking a question. He wasn't trying to get my attention in a normal way. He was just repeating my name, softly but insistently. My heart jumped into my throat. Without thinking, I pushed him away from me and reached for the lamp. I flipped the light on, flooding the room with brightness. He didn't react. He just stood there. My brother has a history of intense night terrors and sleepwalking. I've seen him in those states before. He looks awake, but he isn't. His eyes are open, but they don't focus properly. There's a blankness to his expression that's hard to describe unless you've seen it. I knew immediately that he wasn't fully awake. I started pleading with him, telling him to wake up, telling him to go back to bed. I raised my voice, tried to get through to him, but nothing worked. He didn't respond the way a conscious person would. Then, suddenly, his eyes changed. They focused. He blinked a few times and looked around, confused. His shoulders dropped slightly, like tension had been released from his body. He was awake. The first thing he said made my stomach drop. It wasn't me. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he meant. "What wasn't you?" I asked. He looked at me with that same unsettling stare he only has when he's coming out of a night terror. His face was serious. Too serious. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. "It wasn't me," he said again. "It was the man." Something cold ran through me. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't want to hear more in that moment. I told him to go back to his room. I watched him leave, waiting until I heard his door close before I moved again. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small sound made me jump. Every shadow in the room caught my attention. I kept replaying everything in my head. The figure at the door, the sudden exhaustion, my brother standing inches from my face. His words, it all felt connected in a way I didn't want to think about too deeply. The next morning, we all sat down for breakfast like normal. I hadn't said a word to anyone about what had happened. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, or if I even should. Part of me hoped that if I didn't talk about it, it would somehow lose its power. We were sitting there, eating, making small talk, when my brother spoke, casually, like he was talking about the weather. He said, "I had the craziest dream last night." I felt my stomach tighten immediately. He continued, completely unaware of what he was about to say. "I dreamed there was a man standing in your room," he said. "He was wearing an old-looking hat and a trench coat." I stopped eating. I stared at him, my mind racing. The details matched too closely, too exactly. He hadn't just said there was a man. He described the hat, the coat, the same image I had seen hours earlier. I asked him to tell me more. He said he didn't remember much else, just that the man was there, standing in my room, watching. He said it felt real in the way his night terrors sometimes do, like his body reacted before his brain could catch up. I finally told him what I had seen. The room went quiet. There was no good explanation for it, no easy way to brush it off as coincidence. Two people seeing the same figure independently, describing the same clothing, the same presence within the same night. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who or what that figure was. I don't know why I felt such an overwhelming need to sleep, or why my brother ended up in my room saying my name. I don't know how his dream lined up so perfectly with what I had seen while awake. I've tried to explain it logically. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, shared stress, influence from living in the same house. All of those explanations exist, and I understand them. But none of them fully explain the timing, or the details, or the way my brother said, "It wasn't me, it was the man." What unsettles me the most is that the figure never interacted with me directly. He didn't threaten me, he didn't move, he didn't speak. He was just there, as if his presence alone was enough. Sometimes I think about the way he was facing the door, not me, like he was guarding it, or waiting, or making sure something stayed inside or didn't leave. I don't dwell on it constantly. Life goes on. Days pass, nights pass, but every so often, usually late at night when the house is quiet, I think about that bowler hat, that long coat, that shape standing in my doorway, and I lock my door. Because whatever that was, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something that crossed into my life, stayed just long enough to be seen, and then left behind a question I still can't answer. Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.